Good afternoon. I'm Scott Gartner, Director of the Penn State School of International Affairs, and I welcome you to the Katz Building, home of the School of International Affairs, SIA, and Penn State Law. At SIA, we believe that events like this one, where we can listen to and actively engage with global leaders, represent experiences critical to learning and professional success. The key is to find leaders who are impressive, insightful, and accessible. Lucky for us today, our speaker is all of these and more. Karin Olofsdotter is Sweden's ambassador to the United States. Just starting her third year as ambassador, she was previously Director General for Trade at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Swedish ambassador to Hungary, and has held many other distinguished positions, including serving in Moscow and with NATO. One of the things she was telling us at lunch is kind of unusual to have that economics and security blend that she has. In addition to her native tongue, the ambassador speaks Russian, French, and English. Ambassador Olofsdotter has extensive experience in the United States, being previously Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington, a high school exchange student in New Jersey, and a student at UCLA. In a recent interview in the Washington Post, she said that being an ambassador was, quote, all about getting to learn about a country and getting to know people. And she added, quote, I love my job. I would never like to have another job. Or what we would say at the School of International Affairs is a successful job placement. The ambassador will speak on perspectives in international affairs and diplomacy. Following her presentation, if you want to ask questions, which she and I very much encourage you to, come up, please, and stand in front of one of the two microphones. Just queue up in a line. In order to give as many people as possible the opportunity to engage with the ambassador, we ask that you ask one focused, without multiple parts, question. We ask that you not make a statement, and we're not going to have time for follow-ups. So you get one question, make it good. So this is the ambassador's first time visiting Penn State, although she's been to Pennsylvania previously. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Her Excellency Karin Olofsdotter.
Well, good day, and can you hear me now? Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me here. This is one of the things that I love most about my job is, of course, leaving the capital and going out and meet people who are not in the capital. And I think every country is the same. The capital is not the rest of the country. So I'm so happy to be here. It was a beautiful ride, 4 hours from DC and a fantastic landscape. So I really envy you who get to live in this amazing place. I would, just a few words, maybe call myself the unexpected diplomat. I never ever thought I would be a diplomat. My university education was a bit random, but I have a combination in my background of psychology is my major, and I've studied economics, business administration, and Russian. And as I was a university student early 90s, that's not mine, no. Early 90s, I also have half a semester of general computer technology, which is, I think, more than outdated. And I never thought I would have this job, but Sweden was in a very bad economic situation, which I will get back to, early 90s. So there were basically no jobs. And, you know, in those days, there was just one page in the newspaper where the jobs were advertised. At least that's how it was in my country. And the diplomatic training program was one of them. So still to this day, because I belong to the 2% other, when you look at what education and so on people have in my field. Sometimes today when I drive myself to work, which a Swedish ambassador has to do, I'm the ambassador. So I never ever want to have another job than being a diplomat representing my country. I'm sure there are lots of fun jobs out there. But I have a hard time thinking that any of them could beat mine, because I get to meet so many people. I represent a country which I am very proud of. It has its faults, of course, but I think in the big scheme of things, it's a very dignified country. And, I always learn. So yesterday I was at a climate panel together with my Nordic colleagues in Congress, talking about climate change. And from my perspective, I talked about what industry can do. And today I'm here talking to you. And tomorrow I'm going on vacation to Los Angeles, so it's a good life. No, but really, really good. Good to be here. So I took up my job as ambassador to the United States summer of 2017. When you become an ambassador, what you do to be allowed to start working in the country where you are, you meet the head of state and you present something called a letter of credentials, which in my case then is written, or not personally, but written by the Swedish king. And it's signed by the Swedish king that I am his official representative in the United States. So I had a meeting with President Trump. I got to know that the meeting is around 5 to 7 minutes. And I decided that I wanted to talk about trade and defense, which are the two most important issues in my agenda. And the president, I can assure you, loves Sweden. He told me so many times. So we have a very good and positive relationship. So we have a very good story to tell in the United States. But before I get into that, I will just give you some facts about my country. I guess most of you know where it is. Yes. Some people mistake us for Switzerland. It happens very often. When Spotify was introduced on NASDAQ a year ago, they hung the Swiss flag on the New York Stock Exchange. But actually, bad news is good, because of course it went viral that they had taken the wrong flag. So now everyone knows that Spotify is Swedish. Well, 2/3 of our country is forest. We are physically the size of California, and we just recently made it to be 10 million people. And I guess you all remember when you turned 10, it's something important to be double digit. So we are now double digit. We are very happy about that. In those forests, about 500,000 moose roam. And I am very happy that I just learned that the lion here actually used to roam the forests here. I'm very happy there are not 500,000 of those roaming here. They're maybe a bit more dangerous than a moose. Germans are very fascinated by our moose, so they come to Sweden on vacation and they steal our road signs. On the road there are those signs that a moose might walk across the street. They are picked up by our German friends. It's good tourist industry though, because they like to buy everything that has a moose on it. Sweden is a heavily industrialized country with a lot of heavy industry, but one of our biggest exports is actually music. Most of you have heard about ABBA, but then there are others like Robin, Avicii, and so on, which has really put us on the map. And of course, we have the biggest streaming service coming out of my country in the way of Spotify. We are the first country that banned smacking of children in 1971. That is forbidden. So we have, when it comes to taxes, there is a perception that we have very high taxes. Yes, we do, but in general, our taxes are at the level of the United States, but our VAT is highest in the world. I think it's 25%. We still consume, though, I can assure you. And we love the United States. We are the country in Europe with most McDonald's per capita. My husband actually went in 24 hours 3 times to McDonald's. He really loves it. We are very, very good at recycling. 98% of our own waste is recycled. We even import waste to burn into energy. So we have very big systems for waste to energy systems in our household areas, which is of course very good, both for waste when it comes to waste, but also energy, of course. We also have the highest number of patents per capita, so we are a very, very brainy and smart people. Well, anyway, we have a very good story to tell in your country. We came here, Leif Erikson can be debated if he was Swedish or Norwegian or whatever he was. The Norwegians will probably claim that he was Norwegian, who came to this continent 1,000 years ago. But we came officially in 1638. We established a colony, and I didn't realize that all of Pennsylvania actually was called New Sweden before the Brits took it over in the 1680s, 1670s, something like that. So this could have been Sweden. And we have, of course, through great immigration, 1/4 of our population left for the United States in the 19th century due to poverty, the want of religious freedom, Sweden also being a very hierarchical society. So 1/4 of our population, about 1 million people, left for the United States. And of course, these people have contributed to companies like our household names today, Nordstrom, Walgreens, Greyhound, the bus line, and so on. Swedes took big part building the skyscrapers of Chicago, settlements up north, and so on. And today, of course, our relationship is very much built on trade and investments. And according to our latest count, about 360,000 Americans are employed by Swedish companies. And that's indirectly about 1 million people. And we are the 15th largest investor in the United States. And Sweden is not exactly the 15th largest country in the world. When you count population, even if we're now 10 million, we're about 90 or so. So we have, quite a large number of multinational companies coming out of our country. And you probably know them, even if you don't know that they are Swedish. Ericsson, one of them, who is now really at the forefront of developing 5G and in very close partnership with the Department of Defense here in the United States. Volvo, both cars and trucks. Electrolux, refrigerators. Whirlpool, for instance, is owned by them. Atlas Copco, and everyone knows IKEA. And I still have not met a member of Congress that wouldn't like to have an IKEA in his or her constituency. Because IKEA is extremely conservative when they invest, and they only invest if there's enough middle class. So it's really a sign of that you have reached a certain level. And when our foreign minister goes around and comes to a country where they don't have an IKEA, the first thing our foreign minister is asked, when will IKEA come here? And then we can always say, well, if you get your economy in order, they might consider you. H&M is Swedish as well. And the Volvo Group that I talked before actually owns Mack trucks. And we thought it was great when President Trump had 2 trucks on the south lawn outside the White House, 1 Volvo truck and 1 Mack truck. So they were both Swedish. I don't know if you knew that, but anyway. So we are, given the setup of our country, being fairly small, having a strong industrial base, that our main inventions, or a lot of our inventions and our companies, are based on things that we invented almost 150 years ago. We are a trading nation. So 45% of our GDP comes from trade with other countries. I think it's about 12 or 14 in the United States. I mean, this country is basically a continent, so it's, of course, very different. The United States is our 4th largest trading partner. And of course, we very closely follow the discussions on trade in Washington, and we are very worried. And we do not agree with this kind of policy on protectionist policy. We think it is dangerous. We don't think it's possible to turn back time in a way where we should be self-sufficient in a way, because it will make our products much more expensive, and we will all lose jobs in that sense. So I spend a lot of time in Congress talking to both Republicans on the far right side and also Democrats on the far left side, because I think they are just as protectionist and that we are worried about it. And I usually take the example of IKEA. If you want to buy the sofa called Ektorp, you should do it now while it's still in stock, because it will not be sold in the United States anymore. It's produced in China, and it's becoming too expensive. So we are in dialogue through the European Union, which is representing my country when it comes to trade relationships abroad or with foreign countries, with the United States. But I cannot say that those trade talks are going very well. I don't know if you remember that through during the Obama administration, we tried to reach a free trade agreement, TTIP, between the United States and Europe. We were very close. I still think it would have been extremely difficult to get that politically through. But right now, we are not even close. The United States has slapped tariffs on Europe when it comes to steel and aluminum out of national security reasons. This is not acceptable. Most European countries are NATO allies. We are not a security threat to the United States, and this really hurts our trade relationship. There's also been discussions, if you followed, that the president wanted to do the same when it comes to tariffs on vehicles and vehicle parts. If that would happen, if he would realize the threat of slapping 25% tariffs on European vehicles, we would immediately lose 5,000 jobs in the United States. And if we take our population and transfer that to the United States, that would be the equivalent of you losing 130,000 jobs. So this is extremely serious. Right now, we don't know what the president will decide. He has postponed the decision. I hope really he will come to see that this would also hurt the United States. A lot of jobs would be lost here, and that we can come to an agreement on the trade relationship. We're also in a fight when it comes to Airbus and Boeing, where we both have given subsidies to those companies. We would like to kind of even out those tariffs that we are now slapping on each other. But our American friends have not been interested. And I personally think that this ties into something that I will come to, defense, because if there is a trade war between the European Union and the United States, I think this will also affect our security relationship, where there now are, some countries in Europe who are toying with strategic autonomy for Europe, that we shouldn't be so connected to the United States when it comes to our security. And for a country like Sweden, who's not a member of NATO, this is very serious. We have built our relationship, our own defense through a bilateral relationship with the United States. And I think that when Europeans start feeling or noticing that the relationship is actually physically bad, when a pair of Nike shoes or Levi's jeans are double the price, it will be even more negative. And those then who toy with an independent European defense will have much greater support, because Europeans will feel that we cannot trust our American friends anymore. So this is something that's very serious, and I think it's really time that we look at trade and security as part of the same game. And of course, when it comes to China, we don't like the methods that are used to deal with China on raising tariffs, but we of course are really interested in the result. We want to have the same result. We are really, Chinese authorities, stealing IP rights and the technology transfer and so on, which is of course detrimental for us as well. So we really hope that the president succeeds in this, and we are not so vocal on our criticism when it comes to China, because we are really interested in the same result. As I said, defense is my other priority that my government gave me when I took up this job. And as I said, we are not a member of NATO, and this comes out of historical reasons. We have actually not been at war for over 200 years. We had actually warred ourselves into poverty until 1814, and we had been in all the European wars, and we had lost basically all our territories. We had Norway left in 1814 when we lost Finland to Russia. So then when the First World War came and the Second World War came, we decided to be neutral and stay out of the war. That can be debated if it was the right thing to do or not, but that was the decisions that were taken at the time. So then, after the Second World War was over, we proposed to have a defense union with our Nordic colleagues. But then when NATO was established and it was clear that the Americans, through the treaty, would connect itself to Europe, Denmark and Norway decided that that's the route they wanted to take. We decided, being close to Finland, who was forced to have this kind of friendship pact with the Soviet Union, that it would be best for us to stay out of a military alliance. It also came out of a very strong anti-nuclear movement in my country. We actually contemplated, though, in the 50s to create our own nuclear weapons, and we have the scientists to do it. But it was just a couple of years ago that we sent the last remaining parts of the plutonium to be used for that over to the United States to be destroyed. So this was on our radar as well at the time. Anyway, so we decided to stay outside NATO. That doesn't mean that we are completely isolated. We have decided that we really need to build our security together with others. So we have a very close defense relationship to Finland. We're not yet at the level of operational planning, but very close, and a very, very strong relationship with the United States. We have some agreements with the United States. We exercise together. We develop defense material, airplanes and so on together. Sweden has a very large defense industry, and this comes out of the Cold War. Because we were not part of any alliance, to be trustworthy in that non-aligned movement, so to speak, or being neutral, we couldn't really, we had to support ourselves when it came to our naval capabilities, our airplanes, our fighter jets, our weaponry, and so on. So for being a small country, we basically have an outsized military industry, which is doing very well, and it's selling a lot to this market. Grenade launchers, tanks, we are producing our own fighter jets. 50% of that content is American and so on. So it's a very, very strong link between our countries. And we, of course, cooperate very closely with NATO. We have an enhanced partnership together with Finland. So we are as close as being a member as you can be without being a member. And for the time being, we are very, very happy about that construction. Of course, we, after the Cold War, kind of thought that we were in a happy new environment. I was in Moscow mid-90s, and we thought, you know, Russia would be a great market economy in no time. We were just heading towards a nice, possible, positive future together, which we, of course, were very, very happy about. But things haven't really turned out the way we hoped. We see increased tensions in our area. As you all know, Russia has annexed Crimea, fighting going on in the eastern parts of Ukraine. 10 years ago, there was a cyber attack against Estonia, also attack on Georgia. So things are becoming more and more tense in our region. We have a policy right now which is kind of dual track policy, where we want to increase our contacts with the Russian leadership. My prime minister had his first meeting with President Putin last year. That was the first time in 11 years that a Swedish leader had met a leader of Russia. And of course, we are neighbors, so we should be able to meet, but we haven't felt that was possible. But at the same time, we are increasing our defense spending. So we are now going back to a conscript army, which we had during the Cold War, not to the same size, it's smaller, but all 18-year-olds in Sweden are scrutinized for military service. And I think the cohort is about 100,000 kids every year, and about 5 to 10,000 have to do military service. Now we are also reinforcing our defense capabilities with new versions of our fighter jets. We're also and those we developed with Brazil, actually, who has bought our system. We are also building new submarines, and we have just acquired also the U.S. Patriot missile defense system. And I hope to, in a couple of months, go to. I think the ammunition for the Patriot system is produced outside Hagerstown. So really, really looking forward to that. So. We are also increasing our defense spending up to 1.5% in a few years' time. So we are really ramping it up. And of course, the cooperation here with the United States is paramount for us to do that. So I already talked about our relationship to Russia, which is, you know, our most important foreign policy item, of course. And then you would maybe wonder then why we don't want to join NATO now, given the situation we have at hand. But support for joining NATO is around 40% in my country. And the 4 opposition parties to the government, they all have joining NATO on their agenda. But the Social Democrats, which is our biggest party today, doesn't want to join the alliance. So unless they change their mind, this will not happen. And I think it would unfortunately take that something very critical would happen in our neighborhood, that the tensions are increased a lot for that support to change. So also it's perceived, and we think that given that we are not member of NATO, we can play a different role on the international scene by not being a member. So this, as I said, doesn't mean that we do not cooperate with others. And we have made a kind of self-proclamation. We have a solidarity clause that says that if someone in the Nordic countries or in the European Union or in our vicinity would be attacked or in a severe situation of crisis, we would come to their rescue or to their help. And we hope that the reciprocity would be shown towards us. So it's kind of, it's not an Article 5, but it's kind of a hope we have. We'll see what happens. And we also, as a small country, we really value multilateral organizations because, you know, as a smaller country, it's not really us who set the agenda for the world, and our voice is not that strong. So we always need to form alliances with international organizations. We are a member of the European Union, United Nations. We're probably the best friend of the United Nations. We were really hopeful when this administration came in and said they wanted to reform the United Nations, because we do agree with that it's a body that needs reforms. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that yet, but it's only when the United States puts that on the agenda that it actually happens. So we are still hopeful. Because to uphold international law and the rule of law and international security, we need to have these strong international bodies where we can keep each other accountable. So that's why we are quite vocal with the U.S. administration that they need to stay. The United States needs to stay in these organizations that we formed after the Cold War. Right now, we are a bit worried. The United States has signaled that it might contemplate leaving the Open Skies Treaty. This is probably not something that keeps you awake every night. And it's an agreement that makes us be able to fly over the member states or the signatories to the agreement and inspect their military installations from the sky. It's not today the most effective thing. But it's a treaty. It gives us the possibility to hold the Russians accountable. And if the United States would leave that would be another thing that would make those in Europe who wants to have kind of more strong European defense without the United States get their way. So really, I walk the halls of Congress now and your administration to advocate for the United States staying in the Open Skies Treaty. So you might wonder then, why does a country like Sweden, who has this outlook on security policy, join the European Union? And we didn't originally when it was formed. We didn't join till 1994, actually. Or we had a referendum in 1994 when there was slim margin for us to become a member. And the European Union is a peace organization. It came out of the Cold War or out of the Second World War when, you know, Europe was in ruins. With the help of the United States, extreme generous help of the United States, we started rebuilding our continent. And the Coal and Steel Union was the first agreement to be taken where we connected our industries. And this was, of course, a way to try to avoid that we will come into a war situation again. Europe has constantly been at war with each other, and Sweden has been a big part of that, of course. A big warrior nation. But now, for over 70 years, we've had peace in Europe. And that is because of the European Union. So even though Sweden didn't join the Union for those reasons, as main reasons, we joined mostly for economic reasons, because we had a huge economic crisis early 90s, when actually I was a student at UCLA. All of a sudden, Sweden had an interest rate of 500%. My money was worth nothing. My Norwegian friends, they were very rich in comparison. This was real tragedy, or really difficult times in my country with that economic stagnation out of the 80s, and then the economic crisis, as I said, beginning of the 90s. And then, of course, add to this the fall of the Berlin Wall and end of communism in the eastern parts of Europe. So we thought it would be much more beneficial for us, economically so, to join the Union rather than having a free trade agreement that we had with the European Economic Area. And also, of course, it was more beneficial for Swedish companies to be part of the union. It lowered the transactional costs of doing business in Europe. 70% of our trade is with the rest of the European Union. And also, of course, the free movement of people and goods. I think it's easy to forget in Europe that it wasn't possible before. I remember a time when we had to have a visa to go skiing in France. And today you can, of course, go. You can stay for 3 months in any European Union member that you'd like before you have to have a residency permit and so on. So it gives fantastic opportunities for, especially for young kids studying at the universities in Europe and so on. So our economy right now is doing very well, even though we had, even through the last economic crisis, we did a huge pension reform in the 90s, which has really helped our economy. I just read an article in the last issue of the Washington Post about the pensions in the United States. I think it's Illinois that's on the brink of not a collapse, but extremely difficult times when it comes to pension payments. So that we did this very big reform in the 90s has basically saved us through the economic crisis. We have not joined the euro. It was deemed at the time when we had a referendum that we would be stronger without it, and we fared very well, as I said, in the economic crisis. No one really knows what it would have been like if we were part of the euro. We have to join the euro, but no one is pushing us. I think they're happy where we are right now. Unemployment is fairly low, but it's grown. So right now we're up to 6%. And the biggest challenge we have there is getting our foreign-born community into the labor market. If you arrive to Sweden and you seek asylum and you get asylum, it takes on average 6 or 7 years before you have a job. And this is, of course, absolutely unacceptable. First of all, it's a human tragedy, but it's also a societal tragedy, of course. Few words on Brexit. We think this is a catastrophe, totally bad decision. For us, it means that we lose our best friend, our closest ally. And even though the European Union has 28 member states and we all have a vote, we also somehow know that the biggest decisions comes out of a dark room where Germany, France, and the UK have a discussion on how things should be solved. And when those 3 countries have reached an agreement, it's usually something that we all can live with. And we know that what we think is channeled through the United Kingdom because we are very like-minded on free trade, on security, and a lot of other things. They are leaving that dark room. They are leaving us. So who will be our strongest ally now? And you know the situation in Europe, Germany kind of, evolving, looking into who will be the next leader in Germany, what will be the role of Germany in Europe, and so on. President Macron of France, of course, playing a very strong role or having a very strong role in Europe right now, not always to our liking. And then the UK leaving. So we are really looking at the map of Europe now, trying to find who are our new allies, and we have to have different allies for different issues. So this, of course, is it's a huge tragedy for us as well, of course. And it's also one of our biggest trading partners. But this has led to that there will not be a Swexit. The support for staying in the European Union has gone up dramatically because people have learned what is the European Union. Because now we read articles about, the borders of the UK, the long lines there will be for the customs. The Brits will not be able to study to the same extent in Europe. What will happen with all the pensioners, the British pensioners that are in Europe, on the continent, and will they have to go back? I mean, there's so many issues. So people have really learned what the European Union is all about. So in Sweden and Poland and so on, the support for staying a member and being a member has really gone up. This, of course, doesn't mean that it's not necessary to reform the Union. And those of you who follow European affairs knows that every 15 or 20 years we revise the treaty of the European Union. And I think this will come maybe next budget cycle. So in 5-6 years when the UK, if they now leave, I just read about the Labour Party and Corbyn's new manifest today, where he is proposing a new referendum in the UK. But if they leave, I think in 5-6 years there will be a new discussion on what the union should be all about. You know, maybe that we have some tensions with some partners in the European Union. Sweden is very critical towards a few of the member states, especially on the eastern flank of the Union, Hungary and so on, when it comes to refugees and migration, that they do not take their share when it comes to people who come to the Union. We have an old rule, the Dublin rule, I guess, which says that people should seek asylum in the first country of entry into the European Union. Well, that was easy to say 20 years ago. Then when all the migrants came across the Mediterranean, of course, Greece and Italy and so are extremely hard hit. They cannot absorb all those people. We have had huge amounts of people coming to our country. 4 years ago, 150,000 people asked for asylum in our country over a couple of months. Of course, put an enormous strain on our society. And this is something we really need to do burden sharing within the Union. So I think in a few years' time, when it's clear that a country like mine will have to pay much more for the membership, the actual fee to be a member of the European Union, we already heard that our fee would go up by 50%. And if other countries then don't play their part or going in a non-democratic direction, I don't think the Swedish people will be very supportive of paying that fee. So, and I think there are other countries like that as well. So I think crunch time for what we want the union to be will come in that time. And I wouldn't be surprised if some responsibilities are taken home to the nation states and that we streamline the European Union again. But who knows? But I think it will be extremely interesting to follow. So if I was a student here looking into the international relations and so on, I would dig into that question. I also sometimes get questions if it's safe to go to Sweden. Is Sweden becoming a Muslim country? Will one be raped when one goes to Sweden? Yes, of course, one can be raped. That can happen anywhere, everywhere. But it's not more serious in my country than in other countries. And no, we are not becoming a Muslim country. We are the most secular country in the world. For those of you who have looked into the World Cultural Survey, we are the most extreme country in the far right corner, most individualistic and most secular country in the world. When we get a group of people, new people coming to Sweden, that comes with many of them with very strong beliefs, many without high education, we as I said, cannot support them with jobs because there are very few low-skilled jobs in my country today. We have about 100,000 vacancies, job vacancies, and 300,000 people looking for jobs. So you would think we could fill that, but just like here, we have a discussion on skills. People don't have the right skills, and a lot of our new citizens do not have that. So now we have a big push for a new kind of Sweden year. So the first year when you come to Sweden, you will get much more language training. We will also steer people into training programs, education programs where we lack skills. Just like here, very few electricians and plumbers, good jobs, carpenters, IT people, and so on. So I really hope that this will be very positive, because what we see right now, our most far-right party, which is anti-immigrant, the Sweden Democrats, they are now in the opinion polls our biggest party. They are just as big as the Social Democrats. So they have about 23%, and they used to be around 10% just 10 years ago. And this is, I think, a global trend that we see, that it's a combination of that we are in a technological shift, maybe a shift that we haven't seen since industrialization in the 1820s, 1830s, when we completely changed lifestyle, moving from the farms to the cities, working in industries. And now we are standing in front of new technology that maybe will be life-changing. Who knows? We all talk about artificial intelligence, and we joked around the table where we had lunch that no one really knows what it is. But it kind of feels like we will be, if you're working in the transportation sector, of course you get worried when you hear that all the vehicles will be self-driving. What will be the role of me? And I think we have a combination of this kind of anxiety, technological anxiety, globalization maybe haven't worked for everyone, lots of jobs lost for many, maybe not the possibility to transform into something new, and then add to my country the wave of immigration that people also get a little bit scared or worried about. All this in a mix creates this kind of political landscape that we are seeing both in my country and I think all over Western Europe and the United States. So of course it's very important that we all try to work around this and really meet the concerns of the population in the best year. I will soon stop talking. I just want to say a few words on climate change. As I said earlier, I was on a panel in Washington yesterday on climate change. In Sweden, it's not a political issue. Everyone, all political parties have this at the top of their agenda. This is something we take very seriously. We have already noticed forest fires. We can even start growing wine in the south of Sweden, and that may be a good thing, but we have never been able to grow wine. And it doesn't taste good, I can assure you. It's very bad quality, and I wonder if it will ever be good quality. But just the fact that we can grow it is a sign of that something is changing. So for us, this is existential, but we have also realized it drives innovation. So our companies and our industries, 12 business sectors, have now taken it upon themselves to together with the government. We have across the board unity in Sweden that Sweden will have no carbon emissions by 2045. I mean industrial carbon emissions. And so 12 business sectors have taken it upon themselves to reach that goal. So for instance, the cement industry, which is one of the biggest emitters, have a roadmap how they will be carbon dioxide free by that time. Steel industry, we have a company called SSAB also working here in the United States. They have already invented a method to make steel that is without emissions. They will actually sell the first products made out of that in 2026. And this will, of course, have great impact for the automotive industry and everyone else who uses steel, because their footprint will also be less. So, as I said initially, we have, since we introduced the carbon tax in the early 90s, which is something that has grown gradually. We started out with $25 per ton. Now it's $110 per ton. And that has really changed. Both our emissions are down, as I said, by 28%, but at the same time we have grown our economy. So this really drives innovation and creates new jobs as well. So I really think that this is, I mean, we have to do something. And of course we are upset with the United States leaving the Paris Agreement, but I tell my government that we should be hopeful about the United States, because there are so many cities, I think over 400 in the United States, that have signed up for the Paris Accord. I know there's a huge push here as well when it comes to innovation and technology. The Danes have never sold so many windmills in Texas like they do now. It's fantastic. So I really think the United States will, or is still with us when it comes to climate change. Anyway, I will stop there, and I hope I haven't talked you to death, and looking forward to a discussion. One area that I forgot to talk about is that Sweden has the first feminist government in the world, and it took a male prime minister to declare us a feminist. And what this means, because when you say feminist, people are like, oh, why did they choose that word? But he said that if we would have said we are the first gender equal country in the world, no one would have paid attention. But as soon as you use the word feminist, everyone is like, what's that? That's radical. What it means is that all legislation, proposals coming out of my government, we have always done a gender analysis. Is this good for men? Is this good for women? And most things you don't even think about, a lot of things, like infrastructure and so on. The joke is feminist snow plowing, but that actually means that you do the walkways first and the street after, so people can get out of their house and take their kids to school and so on. So we have a feminist foreign policy and a feminist government as well. And creates a lot of interest in your country. I was just in Illinois half a year ago, and the state legislature there is more than interested, so we've sent them all the information, and they're actually going to Sweden now to check out how it's working. So cheers, I guess. Thank you so much for listening. And I am open for any kinds of questions.
Great. So come on up to a microphone on either side and ask a short question.
Thank you for your time, Ambassador. I'm curious how Sweden evaluates a country's foreign rights record when considering a new trading partner.
What rights?
Human rights record?
Human rights.
Yeah.
Yes. This is something that is very important for us. We actually, just like the United States, write a report about every country in the world every year. We've done it regionally, but we're back now to doing it every year as well. And those are open to the public, those reports. I think the United States reports are not open to the public. And as you can imagine, this creates can give rise to tensions when we criticize countries that are, not to our mind doing the right thing. But it's a way for us to be vocal about it, and there is not one single minister of Sweden that can go to China, for instance, without bringing this up. And we right now have a very, for us, sensitive case. It's a Swedish citizen, but with Chinese descent coming. He's born in China, a poet, a writer, who is now in jail in China because he has been vocal about criticism. So this is something that's something we work a lot on. And in this country, we are mostly we are working on the death penalty, which we think is a human rights abuse.
Thank you for your time, Ambassador. So I wanted to ask, is Sweden working on exporting its climate change best practices? And if so, is it aimed at specific countries? Because I do feel like a country like India, for example, would benefit immensely with the example that you were talking about using waste to convert it into energy. Yeah.
Yes, we do. So our embassy, for instance, in India, works a lot on this. And as far as I know, there's been great interest shown from the Indian authorities. Of course, then your country, or if you are Indian, it's an enormous country. But the technology is absolutely developed. We have, for instance, helped Naipur build a rapid bus transport system that is, of course, much more environmentally friendly because it is those kinds of hybrid buses, I think, but also the way transportation is taking place. So that is high on our agenda. Then, of course, we're not such a big country. And but given what I said earlier about our industry being so big, our industry is, the Swedish consumer and so on would hold a Swedish company very much accountable if they did not work on these issues. So our industry is not just doing it because it's good, but it's also good for economy because the consumers are more concerned these days. Even our banking sector are looking into now creating green loans. So if you, for instance, need a mortgage for a house, you can make sure that it comes the way the investments from the bank is done when they then, in the end give you the money, is done in green industries and so on. So it's something we always talk to foreign governments about. And we have lots of delegation visiting Sweden, looking at, for instance, the waste to energy setups that we have.
Thank you.
And I must add one thing because I really think that companies are the ones that are on the forefront of changing things. I was actually at the groundbreaking ceremony of an IKEA store in Mumbai, the first one. And I think, 25 million people in Mumbai or something like that? And they opened one store. I wouldn't like to be the person in charge of first day opening at that IKEA. But IKEA managed to change the legislation of the province that Mumbai is in, because IKEA always employs half women, half men. They don't open if they can't do that. But women were only allowed to work till 6 o'clock because of safety reasons, I think. So they got the state to change the labor law for women, but IKEA had to promise to bring the women home. But still, I really think investments are so important to so many places that companies can actually change the world if they want to.
Okay. Yes. Hello, Ambassador.
Hello.
Hello. There we go. So my question is, I plan to graduate from this university in a couple of years with a Chinese major. So in this case, based on your experience, what would you recommend? Should I want to go into a career in diplomacy? What would you recommend my minor be?
Oh.
Yes.
I think if I would have lived in a time where it was kind of designated that I knew I would have become a diplomat, I would have studied history and economics and a language.
All right.
Because I think, of course, when it comes down to it, most governments are about the economy of the country. You have to understand economics, I think, to understand political behavior, because in the end, all policies are domestic, I guess. Exactly. Even our foreign policy. Foreign policy is just a kind of branch of our domestic policy. And I think history, not that it repeats itself, but it really gives you an understanding of the world and what has happened and why countries are behaving like they are. Really, because history, I guess, is our own upbringing in a way, in our own families. So history and economics.
Okay. Bye.
What did you choose? Or have you chosen something yet?
Well, I've been looking at several options. I mean, one of the things that this university does is in the college liberal arts, they kind of turn their heads, because when they turn their heads at language majors saying, you have come in here and you want to take a language as a major, that is excellent. We have several options for you. You could work for the government, you could work in business, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And we can do that through a career enrichment network. So my options are open. That's one of the best things in terms of a language major.
Thank you for your time, Ambassador. Tack för din tid.
Tack. Är du svensk?
Ja.
Jaha, vad kul. A Swede.
So I got interested in what you said about the EU and if Sweden would leave it in the future, what would happen to our economy and the trading with the world if we do?
I don't think we would ever leave the union unless it kind of collapsed by itself, because, as I said, and as you know, we are a trading nation. We've been it since the Vikings, I would say. And our whole existence is based on that. And given that we have so many of these multinational companies, a Volvo car, just a random Volvo car, is probably like 10,000 parts. I think it comes from 60 different countries. So, of course, if we would produce that in Sweden, no one would be able to buy it. So for us, trade is really existential. So I don't think that we would ever leave the union. For us, it's paramount. And sometimes I think you need to compare the setup of the European Union with the setup of the United States. If you think about it, United States were also 13 countries or colonies that joined together because they were stronger as a union. And it's of course the same thing with the countries in the European Union. We are stronger together. And actually, if you compare the single market of the European Union, it's sometimes even easier than trading between the United States, between the United States, because there are actually trade barriers between the states as well. So I think sometimes when you hear, especially last week I had the fortune to meet Secretary Ross, Secretary of Commerce, twice. Every time he was so negative about the European Union, it was just terrible, and it was formed as an anti-thesis to the United States and so on. That's of course not true. We come out of this, as I said, the wars, so that the United States wouldn't have to come to rescue us again, so that we could build peace. And that's done through business and economy, to linking the economy. So for us, if the single market would be dissolved one day, that would be awful for us, really. So And as I said, support for the union, being in the union, has really gone up. And even the Sweden Democrats, who had in their party program, and the Left Party, the former Communist Party, had in their party program to leave the European Union, they have both scrapped that now.
Thank you.
I want to first say, thank you so much for your time. But my question is, with such a close proximity to Russia, what is your opinion on their view on climate change?
Funnily enough, once the United States declared it would leave the Paris Agreement, the Russian joined. I haven't really followed closely their climate policy. I lived there in the mid-90s, and of course, during Soviet times and so on, pollution and industries polluting the areas where they were not really an issue at the time. So I think there's probably, this is just my speculation now, I guess there are still a lot of areas which are kind of contaminated or industrial waste and so on. But I think, just like in our country, there is a movement in the population regarding climate change and being better. We have had some concerns. We, for instance, had a huge water dam that we helped build outside St. Petersburg, and that wasn't operational for so many years because of dirty water and so on. But now that has changed. So I'm not really aware of exactly how they work on it, but they have signed up to the agreement. And as well as I know Russians are very... they don't always follow all international agreements that they signed up to, just like we have. But as they have done it, I hope they are serious about it.
Thank you.
I mean, when it comes to environmental issues and so on, of course, our biggest concern have been the big nuclear power plants. Some of them have been closed down, but that they are still risky, so to speak.
Yeah, so with regards, to Russia, it seems like there's a lot of propaganda, flying around, and because they're doing a lot of drilling, up north looking for oil, and there's a lot of going on with that, and a lot of climate change, with regarding to climate change.
Yes.
So I was just curious,
No, and I think that also ties into security policy in the end.
Yeah, they're definitely going across their border, their limits. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you.
So that's the opening of the Arctic. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about Sweden's strategy there, and whether how it thinks about deterrence?
Yes. Well, we are just as concerned about the Arctic as everyone else. We actually were very happy. The Finnish president was just in Washington having a meeting with President Trump. And I think this has gone completely under the radar. But in the declaration from that meeting, it says that we will work together on the environmental challenges of the Arctic. That's fantastic, because I don't know if you remember, there was a meeting of the Arctic Council a year ago where we couldn't have a declaration because Secretary Pompeo refused to have any writings about climate. And of course, our ministers cannot leave such a meeting without mentioning the climate, because that's one of the most serious issues with the Arctic. So I think the meeting with the Finnish president and President Trump was really an important result, which no one has really paid attention to. So I hope that this is something we can work on. Then when it comes to the Arctic, we don't ourselves, as we are not really, I mean, we're covered by Finland and Norway and so on. We don't ourselves operate militarily in that area. We know that is very important for others. We, of course, see how China is doing investments in that area. And we are ourselves now, for instance, having a new investment screening policy where we are looking into if one part of it is real estate in critical areas, because we've had Chinese wanting to buy a port very close up to Norway, and that didn't go through. We have had Russians, that's not related to the Arctic, wanting to, when they build Nord Stream 2, have pieces of our island Gotland that's in the Baltic and so on. We, of course, also are aware of Chinese intentions to look at ports in Greenland. And I think that's where the president's wish to buy Greenland actually comes from. Because you see, and one can joke about it, but in a way, he's right. Yes, one can see that there are tensions here where the Chinese are moving forward their positions. So of course this is worrying for us. And then we see, what do you call that in English? The passage above Russia, the Northern Sea route, of course, and how that will play out. As I've understood, there are not enough ports there still to use that route. But that's of course an extremely interesting and important security dimension as well. And then I think, for us, security of Arctic is very important, but the climate issue is even more pressing, because when we will be really hurt if it starts melting. It's already melting, and we can see that.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for taking the time to come out here. Being someone who's served important functions with regards to Sweden-EU relations and Sweden-United States relations, how do you see the relationship between the United States and the European Union being moving forward in terms of trade, which is obviously a hot topic right now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I really hope. I think, if we are concerned with Chinese trade practices, Chinese subsidies to their industries and so on, which, for instance, the steel issue is such where they have been dumping the prices and so on. If we really want to be serious about that, European Union and the United States must work together very closely, because we are together. First of all, we are 500 million, and what are you, 380 or 400 million? Yeah, we're the biggest trading bloc in the world, and when we unite, for instance, on standards is usually seen as a very unsexy topic, but it is actually one of the most important ones when it comes to trade and developing of technology. If we together set the standards for future technologies, we will be world leading. And the Chinese or other markets will have to adopt to that, because they all want to have access to us. So that's why also we have been worried about the protectionist agenda, or the aggressive, I would say, tone from the United States when it comes to the European Union and us as a market. Actually, it's only in goods that manufactured goods that the United States have a deficit. When it comes to services, there's a huge surplus for the United States. And sometimes I'm a bit surprised here that the service jobs are never counted. It's only the jobs in manufacturing which are counted. And most people actually today, or bulk of people, work in the service sector, and that's the sector that really grows. So I think it would be very dangerous for us and for the world if there would be a real trade war. In the end, I don't think it will be, because I think the losses for the job market and the economy in the United States would be severe. So I'm hopeful, but of course we don't like the tone coming out of the administration on trade. I think it's really dangerous, actually.
Thank you.
Ambassador, I'd also like to thank you for coming to speak at our university, and I also hope you enjoy the warm weather in Los Angeles.
Yes.
So you mentioned early on in your talk that Sweden has a 25% value-added tax.
Yep.
I would just like to hear from you the positives and or negatives of this value-added tax within Sweden and a possible implementation of it in the U.S., because currently only one Democratic candidate, Andrew Yang, is proposing one at 10%.
Yes. Well, we've had an extremely high tax pressure in my country. This was reformed in the early 90s. There was you do know the storybook Pippi Longstocking? Yes. The author of that, she was actually the driving force about changing the tax system, because she all of a sudden had a tax of 110%. So she wrote the very famous in Sweden an article about this. So this was, of course, an absurd tax system we have. So corporate tax is, I think, 21% or something like that, quite low. Income tax for most people is 30%. Over a certain, medium kind of income, then you are taxed 50% for everything above that. So, of course, there is high tax pressure, but for those taxes, we have, we say free healthcare. It's paid for by ourselves, but it's called free healthcare. free education, universities are for free, and a social security system. And this has great support in my country. And this whole system is based on that we trust our politicians. And as long as we trust our politicians to, do fairly good reforms, we are okay with paying these taxes, because as long as we feel that we get good quality for what we pay, we support it. And I've compared to my American friends who have similar kind of jobs. Once an American with like an average income has paid health insurance, put off money to college for their kids, and so on, we basically have the same money left in our wallets. It's just different system of that. I'm fine with that someone decides how my money in that sector will be spent. Here it's that you want the individual to decide it, and completely fine. I don't have any views on that. But so far in my country, there is support for this. And when we have tax debates in Sweden, we're like, oh, it's tough tax debates. Then the Conservative Party would say, we want 0.5% lower. And so that's where in that range we have the debate. Right. And yes, VAT. So food stuffs, that has only like 5%. Okay. Books also very low. So it's other like clothing and shoes and so on, which is highly taxed. But there's no debate on that. People are supportive of that, because then you choose yourself. If I want to buy something, then I can choose myself if I want to buy an expensive thing and pay more taxes, or I want to buy something cheaper, or maybe just save my money. So I think this is where our individual choice kind of plays in, that the consumption is something you steer yourself. But given that our economy is doing so well, people are fairly well off, they consume a lot. So it's and this is the time you should go to Sweden. The exchange rate for me is terrible. You will be so wealthy when you come to my country. So you should really come and visit. So it's not a debate on the VAT system that it should be lowered. No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As everyone is thanking you, I join them. Can you say more about the Greenland situation? It seemed to come into the news as almost a fluke because somebody made an offhand remark, maybe even a smart remark, but then the news analysts followed up with some serious discussion about security. For example, once somebody floated the idea that if Russia just decided to occupy it one day, and it would be a lot harder to get them out than it would be to stop them from going in the first place, and maybe people should be looking at things like this. And do you think there's a security issue? And if so, what do you think the best way to keep it safe is?
Greenland is part of Denmark.
Right.
And Denmark is a member of NATO.
Right.
So Greenland is part of NATO.
Right.
Yes, so it falls under the obligations of the member states of NATO to defend Greenland if that should ever happen. So this is like us saying, no, maybe you can't take care of Hawaii. We will buy it from you. Yeah, this is...
So this was all rhetoric, you think?
I have no idea. But what made us wonder a bit was, I think it was Larry Kudlow who went out and said, yes, we are doing the calculations. Denmark is paying, 600 million whatever currency a year in subsidies to Greenland because, it's a tough economic situation there. And then we will pay that, and then we will give Denmark a one-off fee or a one-off. So somehow there was some kind of serious thinking about it. I don't think it was, I don't know. I thought first when I saw that tweet, I'm being very honest with you now, I thought, okay, president says a lot of things. And I do take that very seriously because the president is always the president. But buying Greenland, maybe not. But then when they came out and had made kind of the calculations, then we were a bit wondering. But then the Danish prime minister called the president and the thing was sorted out. But I can imagine, this is now just me speculating, that because we have seen an increased Chinese interest in Greenland. So maybe there were then that they are buying Greenland. Maybe it's a port or something, but maybe it comes out of that. I don't know. But of course, the president was onto something in the sense that, yes, we see interest from forces that we are not so interested in going for that area. So as you say, if you peel off the layers of such an expression, of course there is something to it, but it is part of Denmark, and Denmark is part of NATO. So that's it. I hope my Danish colleague would have been happy with my answer.
Hi, thank you
Hi.
for taking the time to answer so many questions, and thank you to your country for all your efforts to fight climate change. On that vein, how are the talks about putting a tax on meat going?
Tax on?
Meat.
On meat? Well, not that I've seen really. As I said, foodstuffs has a much lower VAT than other consumption goods, and of course, just like your country, we have a very vocal farm community. Sweden is different than a lot of other European countries in the sense that we have very, very big farms. We don't have very many of these kind of old family farms left, so it's very big, like big enterprises. You would have an old castle, for instance, in my hometown. There's an old castle. They have huge pieces of land, and they have bought even more. And they are now one of Sweden's biggest milk producers, which have really taken on the big milk corporation and so on. So we, for instance, do not share, for instance, the agricultural policy of the European Union with all the subsidies to the agricultural sector. We think it should be able to be standing on its own feet, so to speak. So I think there we share the United States view, because the United States, when it comes to the trade talks between Europe and the United States, they really want to add agriculture. But that is us open up agriculture in Europe for America, and we would like to see that, but that's a no-no for the rest of Europe, which makes it difficult. So when it comes to meat and meat production, there is a meat stigma, of course. So there is much more talk about organic production of meat, and that it used to be called near produced, that it was, not so big transportation. Now they've even gone over to here produced. So, but the issue is still that, for most families, meat produced in Sweden is more expensive than, for instance, meat imported from Denmark. And it's so funny. In Norway, they think they have the best meat, and Swedish meat is absolutely not to eat. In Sweden, we think that Danish meat is absolutely not so good quality, and so on. So it's, I think the agricultural lobbies in each country have been really successful. So, organic meat in Sweden is quite expensive. So still a lot of imported meat. But you see on all meat packaging, it's like produced in Sweden, and there's even like a photo of the farmer, and this is Lisa and Bengt, and they, this is the cow, and so on. I'm not joking. It's true. It's true. So it's become very personalized in a way. Like today we're having Rosa. All cows in Sweden are named Rosa or something like that. Today we're having her for dinner.
Ambassador, I wonder if you could speak very briefly about, given all of the high turnover that we've all seen at our State Department and deepened polarization in our country, what does it take to be an ethical and effective envoy for your country?
Well, the issue with the turnover at State Department, I can't say much critique about that, but of course it's tough for continuity when people change often and so on. But we are very lucky. We have a fantastic desk officer for Sweden. He's been there a long time. We have very good contacts and so on. But there are many positions that are not filled, and I think that puts the United States, especially on senior level, that makes then it tougher for the United States, because you need those senior people, of course. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to navigating in the United States, I think we're all very polarized societies right now. It's like that in my country as well, with social media really pulling us apart, I think, because, like I have a dog, I love my dog, so I Googled a dog bed the other day. Now I only get dog bed advertising in my Facebook flow. And you know how this works. it always just reinforces what you already think. So I think we are less and less becoming, exposed to other people's ideas that were not what we liked from the beginning. And I think this is really one of the biggest challenges to all of us going ahead, because how will we get to know about the other? How will we understand someone with a different opinion? Because we never see them. And I realize in the United States, it's even become down to where people live. If you know it's a neighborhood with a certain political affiliation, if you have another political affiliation, you maybe don't even move there. And this is very dangerous, I think. And I think my country is going in exactly the same direction. So it's no critique of the United States in particular. But given that you are the United States and you are the most important country in the world, and as you are such a large country, it of course gives bigger effect. So what I worry about in the United States, and why I think that the left flank of the Democratic Party is on the rise, I never thought it would grow so quickly. And why also you see the far right of the Republican Party. I really think it's an outcry from the American population that it is polarized. It is people are, as I talked earlier about the challenges we have in Sweden with, jobs being lost, where people don't know where to go, artificial intelligence and all that. And if kind of the social contract in the United States is the American dream, which is that you through hard work should be able to, advance and move up and give your kids a better future. Today, if you look at OECD rankings, the United States is in the bottom 25%. You should be on top of that because that's your social contract. And I think that's what I worry about, that people here feel a bit of hopelessness. And I think that's why we see both on the right and the left side of the political spectrum, they are on the rise. And it's the same in my country, but it doesn't mean as much in my country as when it happens in the United States. And I think the polarization is bigger here, in a sense, as well. And we still have like one news program on one of our 3 TV channels that most people look at, and it's still considered relatively objective. But I think, the backside of the social media development is this, that we are kind of further apart from each other.
First of all, thank you. I had a security-related question. I've been quite interested in Swedish technology in general, and I know you've been exporting a lot of Swedish military technology as well, and actually taking some markets that were kind of interesting for the Americans as well. I think Brazil was supposed to buy the F-35 and then ended up buying the Gripen, similarly to South Africa. I was just wondering if there were any conflicts that kind of came out of that competition.
No, not in that sense. I think the Swiss, we are still hoping that the Swiss will buy our airplanes. So that this is the Gripen fighter jet. It's good enough and for a decent price. A lot of countries don't need at the level of technology or capability of your F-35s, and they are very, very, very expensive. So if you are not in a situation, and Switzerland, who's going to attack them? No, but so for them and for Brazil, that is not also a country that is in that. It's a good enough plane. And what we offer that is joint development, technological development, and so on. So it becomes very attractive for also technological development in that country. And but what we have problems. For instance, now Finland is buying new fighter jets. And of course, as we have such a close relationship with them, we would love for them to buy the Gripens because that would make us even more interoperable. Our fighter jets are NATO interoperable, otherwise we could never sell them. But as I said earlier, 50% of the content of the plane is American. And we have now noticed that the United States do not give us licenses as fast for the production of the planes because we are in direct competition in Finland. And I can really understand that from a market horizon. The problem is just that we are, of course, dependent on selling some to other countries to finance the development of the plane. So it kind of hurts both us and you if we cannot, and I don't mean that it's a given that we should win that deal. Maybe the Finns would like to buy the F-35s. But if our own development is stopped because we are in competition with you, that puts us in a very weak spot. And I know that our American military friends, of course, really value the cooperation with Sweden because geographically we are where we are. And we have a very modern defense industry, both industry and defense system. So we know that we are a very valuable partner to the United States. So I wish that the United States would be more confident in their own product and not having to stop our product and have a fair competition on it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for so interesting discussions. And I hope I haven't talked too much. Thank you.